Brought to you by the Capital One Venture X card. Earn unlimited 2x miles on everything you buy and turn everyday purchases into extraordinary trips. Plus receive premium travel benefits like access to over 1,300 airport lounges and a $300 annual credit for bookings through Capital One Travel. Unlock a whole new world of travel with the Capital One Venture X card. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. Lounge access is subject to change. See CapitalOne.com for details.
From the New York Times, I'm Michael Navarro. This is The Daily. Three years ago, Oregon became the first state in the country to decriminalize the possession of hard drugs. Now, they're about to reverse course. Today, my colleague Mike Baker on what went wrong. It's Tuesday, March 12th. Mike, I want to begin with how and why the state of Oregon ever decided to decriminalize hard drugs, the decision that really sets this entire story.
Turn right onto North D Street, then turn left onto Gordon Avenue.
5 years ago, just before the pandemic, we can all remember the opioid crisis that was spreading across the country.
This route avoids a crash on I-75 south approaching Cincinnati. You are on the fastest route. You should reach your destination by 8:58 a.m.
Alarming rate. And the state ranked among...
Turn left onto Gordon Avenue.
...treatment at the time. And as we know, arrest and jail have been a central strategy to combating drugs for decades. And for people in Oregon, they're looking around saying, this has not been working. That model is broken. It's time for a new path.
In a quarter mile, turn right onto North B Street.
Is it time to decriminalize these drugs and focus on treatment? And there was already a roadmap that suggested decriminalization could work.
Just explain that.
Well, if you remember, Washington State and Colorado did well. Legalized.
Take the next left onto Rhea Avenue.
Oregon legalized it shortly after in 2014. And the states that followed that path, I think they...
In 1,000 feet, turn right onto North B Street.
They could reprioritize their law enforcement resources. They could deal with racial disparities that had been in the system for decades. There were a range of benefits, all without the sort of doomsday scenarios that a lot of people had predicted.
Take the next right onto North B Street.
It all fall, as some had feared when pot was decriminalized in any of these states.
Right, and now it's spread across the country. About half of states have legalized marijuana. And now, obviously, pot is...
Continue for 8 miles.
Opioids are much harder drugs. But at a fundamental level, the motivation here is still the same, that jail is not the answer. And so people started to really coalesce around this idea. It's a progressive state, and advocates saw a pathway to develop a plan and put it on the ballot for voters to consider. So that's how in 2020 we found ourselves with this ballot initiative, Measure 110.
Okay, so tell us about Measure 110. What's in it exactly?
The thrust of the measure is really to focus on stop treating drug addiction as a crime and start treating it as a health issue. And there are two parts of the plan. On one side, you would decriminalize possession of small amounts of drugs, not an amount that maybe a dealer might carry. And that would be decriminalizing things like heroin and cocaine and fentanyl. And on the other hand of the initiative, you'd have these long overdue investments, hundreds of millions of dollars, in building out drug treatment services that the state had really been lacking.
So, as proposed, what happens when authorities in Oregon come across an addict who possesses a small amount of cocaine or fentanyl, for example? What's the envisioned process?
If an officer comes across someone on the sidewalk using a drug, the goal was for that officer to not arrest, but to issue a citation, the $100 fine. Instead of sending that person to jail, they could avoid that fine by calling a phone number, getting a health assessment, and potentially being directed into a treatment program that would serve them.
So the thinking is nobody is going to want to pay that $100 fine, so somebody will instead call that number and enter this pipeline for treatment.
Right. A small penalty, a big funnel to get people into treatment. And at the same time, there's a ton of funding available to make this happen because the plan takes cannabis tax revenue that the state has been collecting and directs it into building out this treatment.
So, in a sense, one form of decriminalization of pot finances the cost of decriminalizing the other, which is hard drugs.
You got it. And there's a lot of money behind the effort, and there's also a lot of powerful people. The Drug Policy Alliance, which was a reform group backed by billionaire George Soros, contributed millions of dollars to lead the effort. The initiative also won funding from Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan. And it was winning big endorsements left and right. Everyone from the ACLU to the State Democratic Party to the Oregon Nurses Association. And in Portland, the local district attorney, Mike Schmidt, the prosecutor who would handle drug crimes in the city, he comes out and says,
you know, I think what we've been doing clearly has failed.
He's also in favor of Measure 110.
Wow.
Let's try something different.
There was really sort of a groundswell of support that was building as the year went on. And in November 2020,
and a first in the nation in Oregon.
Oregon voters passed a groundbreaking drug law reform.
ballot measure 110 passes with 58% of the vote.
Well, I think this is a good thing because way too many people get locked up in America for way too long.
I mean, I view Oregon as a very important, and I'll say necessary, lab experiment. So let's all watch. I mean, it's worth saying, this moment is kind of a revolution in America's relationship to hard drugs.
Absolutely. One advocate said that night that the results were like taking a sledgehammer to the cornerstone of the drug war. They really envisioned at that point that this was going to be the start of a wave of legislation across the country.
The first of many states to do this.
Right. They envisioned movement in Washington State and Vermont and Maine and DC, and then building up momentum towards an eventual ballot initiative in California. This was the start of a new wave of decriminalization.
Okay, so what happens after Measure 110 is adopted by the voters in Oregon and this new system is in place?
So it rolls out in early 2021. It's finally happening. Police, instead of arresting people, they start handing out these $100 citations. But the rollout's a bit rocky from the start. Pretty soon it becomes clear that very few people are calling this state hotline to be guided into treatment. And over the following months and then years, what people see on the streets of Portland in particular, but also in other parts of Oregon, is a sense of lawlessness.
This corner of Southwest 4th and Washington is in many ways a hub of downtown, and one where the crisis on our streets is on full display.
There's open drug use, people shooting up or cooking drugs on the streets.
Since the overdose, how many times have you smoked thus far?
About 15 to 25 times today, and it's probably not even.
You know, in portions of downtown Portland, it wasn't uncommon to see people really in the throes of crisis, screaming in the middle of the street.
Back when I was homeless, it was brutal, but nothing like this today.
Businesses were suffering. Many of them started hiring private security.
You can't get a police response. If you try, you wait on hold for hours, only to be told just fill something out online and hope, and that hope is dead.
People in Portland were complaining, like, this is getting worse.
Overdoses in downtown Portland led to another loss of life on a sidewalk.
People start to see overdoses around them on the streets. More people in downtown Portland are carrying Narcan on themselves just in case they encounter someone who's overdosed on the sidewalk.
It's just been relentless.
And through all that, the overdose numbers are surging upward. Opioid overdose deaths rose 50% in 2021, then another 30% in 2022. It's gotten so bad that in the county where Portland is, there were more deaths during the pandemic from overdoses than from COVID. And even for people who had supported this decriminalization movement, they're starting to rethink their position. Before long, there's a rising call in Oregon to get rid of Measure 110 altogether.
We'll be right back.
One Life, a new film from Bleecker Street. Anthony Hopkins stars in the incredible true story of Nicholas Winton, a man who helped rescue hundreds of predominantly Jewish children from Czechoslovakia from the Nazis on the eve of World War II. 50 years later, he is haunted by the fate of those he wasn't able to save. Also starring Helena Bonham Carter and Jonathan Pryce, Variety calls One Life stirring, a testament to the power of good. Only in theaters Friday.
My name is Thomas Gibbons-F. I'm a journalist with the New York Times. I served in the Marine Corps as an infantryman. When it comes to reporting on the front line, a lot of the same basics are at play. You're looking at the map of where you're going. If you're on a paved road, field roads, is there a hospital nearby? Is your body armor affixed with a first aid kit? Does everyone know where that first aid kit is? We arrive in a military position. I get out of the car, I look at my watch. I set a timer, no more than an hour. I'm listening for drones, jets, check in with the team. Is everyone comfortable? And if they are, then we proceed. Frontline reporting is dangerous, but I think nothing is more important than talking to the people involved, hearing their stories and being able to connect that with people thousands of miles away. Anything that can make something like this more personal, I think, is well worth the risk. New York Times subscribers make it possible for us to keep doing this vital coverage. If you'd like to subscribe, you can do that at nytimes.com/subscribe.
So, Mike, as people start calling for Measure 110 to be rolled back, I'm wondering, were they right to point the finger at this law? Was Measure 110 really to blame for what was happening in Oregon?
It's really hard to say. The passage of 110 is happening at the same time that these other forces are sort of colliding in Oregon. We have the pandemic, which is contributing to societal struggles, exacerbating problems on the streets. We have fentanyl, which has been spreading around the country. It's particularly addictive, it's super cheap, it's deadly, and around the time that Measure 110 passed, it was really starting to surge in Oregon. And we have this other reality that Measure 110 was really supposed to be two parts. And while the decriminalization component had been put into place, the other half of the bill, the investments in drug treatment, were still struggling to get off the ground.
Just explain that. How much was it struggling to get off the ground?
The state agency that was in charge of organizing the effort of directing the tax revenue. It's also the same agency that was at the same time in charge of the state's COVID response and distributing vaccines at the time. There were delays in organizing how that revenue was going to be distributed. And then later on, even when that money did go out the door, the drug treatment organizations that received it, they found themselves struggling to find workers to actually do the job.
Right, another way, perhaps, that the pandemic collides with all this.
Right, and so you have these, the decriminalization component may have happened just a few months after the bill was passed, but years after the bill was passed, there's still a fledgling effort to get these treatment programs the funding and the resources and the growth they need to actually have a powerful impact.
So there are a number of reasons, you're saying, why the problem of drug use and drug overdoses get worse in the aftermath of Measure 110, and one of them seems to be that the measure itself isn't really fully implemented, and that this essential half of it, treatment, doesn't really ever get up and running the way it was supposed to. So what people end up seeing on the streets there in a place like Portland is kind of one side of it, the permissive side of the law, in the form of these desperate drug-infused street scenes, but not much of the treatment side that was designed to treat it and prevent.
In a quarter mile, turn left onto the US 27 South, Ohio 126 East ramp to Cincinnati.
The passage of Measure 110 and these rising overdose numbers. But to a lot of voters, it doesn't really matter. And one thing that's really striking is how many progressives in the state really start taking the position.
Turn left onto the US 27 South ramp.
Like who?
Well, we have a new governor, a progressive, Tina Kotek.
Voters did not vote to say it's okay to use drugs out in public.
She had been supportive of the decriminalization component of Measure 110, but she starts promoting the
Continue on US 27 South for 5 miles.
sort of public drug use that people are seeing on the streets is not acceptable behavior.
We don't allow it for alcohol. We don't allow it for marijuana. Why would we allow it for other types of drugs? So unintended consequence of 110 needs to get fixed.
You know, another notable figure shifting on this issue is that local district attorney, Mike Schmidt, in Portland.
I do think that we need to take a hard look at open use on our streets. I think it's time to recognize that that doesn't make people feel safe.
He now starts coming up to tell lawmakers that we really do need to have some sort of criminal penalty here to ban this public drug use we're seeing in the city.
So I think looking at open use on our street is another area where we should maybe look at changing the law a little bit.
And as that shift is happening,
we have new polling that reflects frustration.
It's clear to everyone that voter opinion has shifted on this.
56% of Oregonians say enough is enough, get rid of it already.
And Democratic lawmakers, leadership, you know, they're starting to see the writing on the wall. So by last fall, just a few months ago, there's a bipartisan group of lawmakers saying that they're ready to pass legislation that would effectively roll back Measure 110.
And specifically, what would this legislation do, and how would it do it?
The bill proposed to recriminalize possession of hard drugs that could result in jail sentences of up to 180 days. But the measure is also designed to offer a whole range of opportunities for someone caught with drugs to avoid criminal penalties, to avoid the criminal record. The idea was that local law enforcement could potentially choose to take someone directly to treatment instead of to jail. For those who do end up within the court system, the hope is to create a whole range of off-ramps from criminal prosecution. Someone could request probation, complete treatment, and then have the charges dismissed. Even those who sort of like go through the treatment and stumble, or they don't show up, or they fail, they are offered additional chances along the way to get treatment instead of jail time.
So it's not a total rollback and recriminalization, but it's a rollback, and it is a form of recriminalization.
That's right. And this sets off really some of the most emotional and personal debate you will ever see in a state legislature.
Thank you everybody for being here today. This meeting is going to go until 9 o'clock tonight, or until we run out of public testimony, whichever comes first.
You have supporters of the rollback saying that decriminalization was a failure.
I've watched firsthand the crisis unfold outside my doors. Not only are our most vulnerable populations dying in numbers we've never seen, but you've asked the community at large to normalize walking by dead bodies on the sidewalk. Normalize being chased by people high on meth wielding machetes.
They're describing horrific scenes they witnessed on the street.
As a concerned father, I drive down Lancaster every morning to take my kid to school, and I see people at bus stops smoking fentanyl, and I see kids waiting to the side because they can't use the bus stops.
They're telling stories of family members struggling with addiction.
One of my sons, Taylor Martnick, he died at the age of 24 due to a fentanyl overdose.
They describe people who could not help themselves.
When Taylor was using, he was in what we would call his drug brain. He wouldn't have made a decision to look at a card and call a treatment center.
They really argue that there needs to be some sort of consequence in order to compel people towards treatment.
I am about to celebrate 5 years clean in August. I have been through the system myself here in Marion County. I had about 15 years in and out of Marion County Jail.
One woman actually described her own personal story of addiction.
And had it not been for the accountability piece when I did get clean almost 5 years ago, and the fear of going back to prison and never seeing my son again, I wouldn't be sitting here today.
She says the fear of going back to prison and not seeing her son was the reason that she was motivated to get clean.
So these are members of the community, including former drug users, saying we think decriminalization has been a mistake because we need the deterrent of criminal charges.
Yeah, and at the same time, opponents are also filling these hearing rooms.
Many tonight have said that the status quo is not working, and I agree. The status quo is not working because there aren't enough treatment that's available.
People said all those treatment programs that were promised, they're still not in place.
So while you can use whatever language you want in order to dress up what you're doing, the fact is what you're choosing to do is to place addicts in jail.
And so even if you have a bill that says there are off-ramps to get people out of jail and into treatment, those don't yet exist. And so people will be languishing in jail.
Because people are still going to die. They're just going to die in jail cells instead of on a street corner.
And people share, again, very personal stories.
As the eldest daughter of a woman who struggled with addiction almost my entire life and overdosed 3 years ago, I know firsthand the need for healing. Jail never worked for my mom.
People describe stories of family members who had been addicted and gone through criminal convictions and prosecutions and found that it had not provided them help to get them out of their struggles, but had rather prolonged them.
As a mother, I have witnessed my son's struggle with opioid use disorder since 2000.
In a quarter mile, turn right onto the I-275 West ramp to I-74, Indianapolis.
Has been his involvement in the criminal justice system.
It had left them with trauma and the stigma of conviction and made it harder for them to find stability in housing or jobs.
Turn right onto the I-275 West ramp.
Monetary slip for his many years of hard work in progress to be lost.
And opponents of the rollback, they're warning that the state is effectively
in a quarter mile, merge onto I-275 West.
50 years of the war on drugs has not fixed our addiction crisis. 50 years of disproportionately harming Black and brown Oregonians. How will the solutions you are proposing be different?
I heard a lot of people in 2020 say that they believe Black Lives Matter, but you don't if you pass up.
Continue on I-275 West for 5 miles.
Racial disparities are going to come back, and it's going to upend lives.
Thank you. Members, anything to add before we conclude?
So what ends up being the final vote in the legislature?
The bill passed pretty swiftly by wide margins in both the House and the Senate. And now Governor Kotek has signaled that she's ready to sign it.
So Measure 110 is effectively dead now.
That's right.
And where, Mike, does that leave the broader movement that you described earlier as so excited about the passage of 110 in Oregon? That advocate who said this was taking a sledgehammer to the old regime, the old war on drugs. I mean, what does this do to the hopes of decriminalizing hard drugs more broadly?
I mean, this whole experiment in Oregon has really been quite a devastating setback to the decriminalization movement. You know, a lot of other states were watching Oregon to see whether it was a pathway to success, whether they could replicate the model, whether they should be the next ones to be decriminalizing in their state. And now, all of those seem to be off the table. You know, there are not lawmakers moving toward decriminalization, and same with voters. You know, that ballot initiative that advocates had hoped to pass in California to decriminalize drugs this year. Now, instead, it's the opposite. Advocates are now facing the prospect of battling an initiative that would actually increase drug penalties. You know, in cities all up and down the West Coast, there's sort of an effort to crack down once again. In San Francisco, we saw the mayor pressing to arrest drug users, saying that tough love is sometimes needed. Voters there last week approved a measure to require drug screening for welfare recipients.
Wow.
Now, that's the kind of policy we often see.
In 2 miles, use the left lane to take exit 28 for I-74, US 52 East towards Cincinnati.
A major shift here that has served as quite the setback for people looking to end criminal penalties for those possessing drugs.
But Mike, because this was such a flawed rollout of Measure 110 in Oregon, it feels like it's hard to know whether this was a flawed idea. I mean, there's something a little bit tragic about it in that sense, because Measure 110 never really functions the way it was supposed to have. So we don't really have a model for a successful implementation of decriminalization and treatment of hard drugs upon which the public can judge whether the basic logic of this is sound, right? And instead, we're getting a backlash to a poorly executed version of this that has seemed to quash the entire project.
Yeah, when I was down at the state capitol in recent days, I was talking to some lawmakers who said that given the lack of the state's treatment options back in 2020, Oregon was the worst place to try a decriminalization experiment.
In half a mile, use the left lane to take exit 28 for I-74, US 52 East toward Cincinnati.
Maybe they could once again explore removing those criminal penalties.
The argument here basically is that in an ideal world, somebody would execute a plan like Measure 110 as it was fully...
Use the left lane to take exit 28.
And then we could say, once and for all, this actually works, or it doesn't.
Yeah, but it feels
Continue on I-74 for 10 miles.
Well, Mike, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
This podcast is supported by Fred Hutch Cancer Center. What happens at Fred Hutch when they look beyond? They introduce T-cell therapies to track down and destroy cancer cells. They lead clinical trials and bring the world safe COVID vaccines and save over 1 million lives thanks to their discovery of bone marrow transplants. Discoveries at Fred Hutch Cancer Center impact the world. Learn more at fredhutch.org/lookbeyond.
Here's what else you need to know today. In defiance of their party's leader, Donald Trump, House Republicans are pushing forward with bipartisan legislation that would force the Chinese owners of TikTok to sell off the popular platform or face having it banned in the United States. Both congressional Republicans and Democrats argue that TikTok is a national security threat because of its ties to the Chinese government. But Trump, who was highly critical of TikTok as president, now opposes the legislation following a meeting a few weeks ago with a major TikTok investor. And an effort by the British royal family to diffuse rumors about the health of Catherine, Princess of Wales, backfired on Monday when she was forced to acknowledge that she had digitally altered a photograph of herself and her children that was released over the weekend. Catherine, who had surgery in January, has not made any public appearances in months, setting off global speculation about her well-being. The release of the photograph appeared timed to address those concerns until news agencies discovered it had been altered. In a statement, Catherine apologized for manipulating the image. Today's episode was produced by Stella Tam, Shannon Lee, and Summer Tamani, with help from Moore Sadie. It was edited by Liz Urbana, fact-checked by Susan Liddy, contains original music by Miriam Lozano and Dan Powell, and was engineered by Chris Wood. Our theme music is by Jim Grunberg and Ben Lansford of Wonderland. That's it for Daily. I'm Michael Bobon. See you tomorrow.
This podcast is supported by On Investing, an original podcast from Charles Schwab. Each week, hosts Liz Ann Saunders, Schwab's chief investment strategist, and Kathy Jones, Schwab's chief fixed income strategist, along with their guests, analyze economic developments and bring context to conversations around stocks, fixed income, the economy, and more. Download the latest episode and subscribe at schwab.com/oninvesting or wherever you get your podcasts.
This podcast is brought to you by Northern Trust Wealth Management. What is the why that drives today's most successful business leaders? Tune in each month to the Road to Why podcast by the Northern Trust Institute, where host Eric Chapea dives deeper with entrepreneurs on their life's work, legacy, and the greater meaning of it all. Find the Road to Why where you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Here's your money briefing for Tuesday, March 12th. I'm J.R. Whalen for the Wall Street Journal. More people hoping to generate some extra cash to help pay the bills are launching their own vending machine businesses.
Vending machines have a relatively low startup cost, so unlike the idea of buying a whole business like a laundromat or something, you can get going with vending machines for just a couple $1,000s. The other thing is just that this is a pretty intuitive business model to people. Most people have come across a vending machine in their life, but just the basic premise of you put this box somewhere, you stick some food or drinks in it, and you have people sell it, it just seems to make sense.
So how does it work? We'll talk to Wall Street Journal personal finance reporter Joe Pinsker after the break.
Laura, come on.
The less your business spends, the more margin you keep. NetSuite by Oracle brings accounting, finance, inventory, and HR into one proven platform, helping you reduce costs everywhere. Now through April 15, NetSuite is offering a one-of-a-kind flexible financing program. So head to netsuite.com/Wall Street right now.
Vending machines have become a popular source of generating passive income. Wall Street Journal personal finance reporter Joe Pinsker joins me. Joe, when we say passive income, what does that mean?
It's a compelling term, and it's also a bit of a tricky one. The purest form of passive income is that you aren't working at all and just letting cash flow in from some source you've set up, maybe like owning a rental property or something. In practice, there are many things that end up under the umbrella term of passive income, and some of them are sort of more low effort than no effort, and vending machines sort of fall into that category.
So how big is the vending machine business in the U.S.?
There are about 3 million vending machines in the country. That's according to a trade group called the National Automatic Merchandising Association. Together, they all sell about $18 billion a year in products, and that means the average machine is generating about $525 in revenue per month.
Oh, so this could be a lucrative business.
Oh, sure, but like any business, it can kind of succeed or fail based on how you operate it. And there are really two reasons why people are drawn to this in particular. One of them is that vending machines have a relatively low startup cost. So unlike the idea of buying a whole business, like a laundromat or something, you can get going with vending machines for just a couple $1,000s. The other thing is...
In 2 miles, use the right 2 lanes to take the I-75 South, US 27 South exit toward US 127 South, Lexington.
Put this box somewhere, you stick some food or drinks in it, and you have people sell it, it just sort of seems to make sense.
Well, I'm no economist, but I love pretzels. I guess snacking and getting a case of the munchies is recession-proof.
This is something that people in the vending world remark on often, how there's sort of bottomless demand for these things. Sort of like somebody gives haircuts for a living. Lots of machines actually do really well, particularly at workplaces where people are sort of a captive audience if they're hungry and want something to eat.
How does somebody acquire a vending machine? Do they have to buy it?
Yeah, the most common place a sort of everyday person would go and get one is something like Facebook Marketplace. You just sort of go online and buy one. You can get a range of different qualities there. Some of them may be less reliable than others, but that's where a lot of people get started.
One of the people you spoke with who has started a vending machine business touted his success in several YouTube videos. Here's a listen.
Alright guys, we made it to the Vending Bites headquarters. I actually have all the money that we collected today, so let's go inside and let's count it and see exactly how much the 4 machines made, which turns out that the first location made $122 with 60 cents, and the second location $164 with 25 cents, bringing the grand total to about $300 after 7 days.
Now Joe, he's had some success with his vending machines, but what are the costs and challenges involved in starting this kind of business?
He's definitely open about how much work it takes and how many things can go wrong if you try to set up your own vending machine business. There are lots of success stories, but there are also plenty of people who really struggle with it, and a lot of it has to do with the location that you end up placing your machine in. If it doesn't have the right sort of foot traffic, you could be in trouble. I talked with a couple from Alabama that put a machine in a gym, hoping that it would bring them some extra money each month and help them pay the bills, but lately it's only really been selling about $30 per week, which is well under what they were expecting it to. So some people do have a lot of trouble with this once they get started.
So there's a lot of work here to doing this type of business. Why did people tell you they decided to go down this road?
A lot of it is out of financial need. Some people wanted help just sort of making ends meet, paying the bills each month. Other people wanted to pursue life milestones, like buying a house.
In a quarter mile, use the right 2 lanes to take the I-75 South, US 27 South exit toward US 127 South, Lexington.
And then on a higher level, I think one of the motivations here is just that many people are tired of the time and energy that a 9-to-5 job takes up, and they want to try to find a way to get out of that and to use a
Use the right 2 lanes to take the I-75 South exit.
Is this like any other business where it costs money to make money?
Definitely. You have to
continue on I-75 South for 4 miles.
You have to then pay to stock up on product at stores like Costco or Sam's Club, and you have to pay the occasional maintenance repair fee when the machine breaks down. There's a common moment, probably many of us can picture, where a bag of chips gets snagged on a coil of a machine. If you're the owner of that vending machine, you're the one who actually has to fix it.
How do the people you spoke with say they started their vending machine business?
A lot of them found the idea online, and that's sort of where they ended up getting a lot of their information, on social media platforms like Reddit or YouTube. And that sort of led them down a process of sort of the 2 main things you have to do to get this going. One of them is finding a location to put your machine, and the other is actually buying a machine. I list them in that order because some people make the mistake of first buying a machine and then having to store it somewhere for a couple months before they actually have a place to put it. So there are things you might not think of as a beginner here that are important to get, and a lot of people are looking online and on social media for information.
From doing the research to actually making money, do people typically want a cut of the proceeds along the way?
Some locations where you place a machine would let you do that at no charge, but it's also fairly common for them to ask for a cut of sales, maybe 5% up to 20% or something like that. Others might ask for a flat fee. So sometimes you may have to pay in order to park your machine somewhere.
That's WSJ reporter Joe Pinsker. And that's it for your Money Briefing. We'll be back tomorrow with WSJ's Ann Turgeson to discuss another resource people are turning to for some extra cash, their 401k. This episode was produced by me, J.R. Whalen, with supervising producer Melanie Roy and deputy editor Chris Sinsley. Thanks for listening.
NPR.
This is The Indicator from Planet Money. I'm Darian Woods.
And I'm Waylon Wong.
So Waylon, we've heard a lot about this disconnect between how the US economy is doing and how people actually feel about it. This critical topic, especially coming into election year. We'll certainly be following it closely on The Indicator.
That's right. We've been talking a lot about the vibes, right? Jobs and economic growth have been high, inflation is cooling off, but a lot of Americans have been feeling bad about the economy.
Yeah, and a lot of potential reasons. Maybe people are still burnt from when inflation was high, or maybe it's the expensive cost of borrowing for a car or a mortgage.
So you're on the case. Are you going to bring us some answers today?
Not today, so I'll temper your expectations. But I will go deep into one potential explanation that intrigued me when I was looking into this. So this recent paper found that the financial media might be part of the problem.
Oh no, that's me! And you! That's us!
Me too. I'm sorry,
oh,
we might
no.
be part of this.
I'm both intrigued but also terrified to hear more.
Yes, we will have a struggle session looking in the mirror after the break. Harris is the Vice President and Director of Economic Studies at the Brookings Institution. And until last year, he was the Assistant Secretary for Economic Policy at the Treasury Department under President Biden. And that's where he started ruminating about the financial media.
It felt like it was almost this race to negativity. And that you could bring up things that were happening in the economy that were really good. So for example, you see this really sharp decline in the unemployment rate for black workers, or we had the lowest rate of unemployment for people with disabilities. So you would kind of bring up in conversations with journalists, or you would listen to conversations on cable news, and it just felt like any sort of positive characterization of the economy would be immediately shot down with a yeah, but.
Well, you know, I hear where he's coming from. I also think it's the job of a journalist to say, yeah, but...
Yeah, and it's his job to highlight the good news. But Ben wanted to see if the media was getting more negative over time and relative to the economic fundamentals. So, yes, that's the traditional job, but was it changing over time? So I got together with his co-author, Aaron Sojourner, and they downloaded this data set from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Since 2015, the San Francisco Fed has taken a sample of newspapers from around the country, and it's teamed up with a tech company to use a type of AI called natural language processing.
Okay, I've heard of this kind of process before. They call it sentiment analysis, right?
Yes, exactly. So the AI scans economic articles for words like exploding or struggling, and it gives these words a score about how positive or negative they are. And the sentiment scores go all the way back to 1980. And in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, it seemed like the financial press tracked the numbers in the economy fairly closely.
So when things got worse, major U.S. newspapers started reporting in ways which was more negative, and when things were improving, you would see that reflected in the way the major U.S. newspapers were reporting on that. But in 2018, this all changed.
Huh. What happened in 2018?
I have no idea. Ben doesn't either, but there seemed to be this clear break with the financial media.
What you saw was that it was just regularly more negative than you would have predicted.
And it was getting more negative over time.
So we were just getting super bummed out.
Well, as an economics reporter, I am fascinated, and I feel like we should test whether the indicator is more negative than the economic data should suggest.
I love that idea.
And so how do you suggest?
In 1.5 miles, use the left lane to take exit 1B for I-71 North, US 50 East toward US 52 East.
And basically create a score of negativity or positivity.
Ben, I am scared about this prospect, but I would love to do this to figure out where the indicator indicates.
I am dying to see the results.
And so they did like a bespoke analysis just of our show?
Yeah. I got in touch with the San Francisco Fed, and they were willing to do it for us. After a few days, we got the data from the San Francisco Fed. I sent them to Ben Harris at Brookings, and he ran our sentiment numbers against his own numbers of how the economy was doing over time.
I am in such suspense.
You've run the indicator's sentiment through your model. What did you find?
So the results were very interesting. The indicator was more positive than would be predicted by the economic fundamentals.
Yay! I feel more positive.
We are the opposite of what the rest of the financial media are. And it's true, we did go up and down with the economy, but just our baseline was way happier than the newspapers.
I feel like the basic indicator personality is to be more positive. Not like we're being glib, but I feel like we try to be upbeat, we try to be a friendly explainer, we try not to just be bad news bears all the time. And so in some ways this doesn't surprise me.
Ben did tell me something that made me pretty relieved, and this one was about political bias.
There doesn't seem to be any pattern related to presidential administrations. So it doesn't seem to be politically biased.
Shout it from the rooftops. Yes. We're neutral.
But you know this thing about the indicator being so positive, I could not let go of wondering why this might be. So on the second week of February, I spoke to Adam Shapiro and Dan Wilson at the San Francisco Fed directly. And Dan told me what the most positive episode was, and this could give us a clue.
Oh my gosh.
The most positive episode was February 6, 2020,
So the episode was about legal betting on the Oscars.
That's hilarious. Betting on the Oscars, our most...
In a quarter mile, use the left lane to take exit 1B for I-71 North, US 50 East toward US 52 East.
5 hours, I would not have been able to guess that was our happiest episode.
And looking through the transcripts, there was a reason for this. It would explain also why the indicator is systemically...
Use the left lane to take exit 1B, then use the left lane to continue on exits 1A, 1B.
Yeah, the episode betting on the Oscars has laughter.
Use the left lane to continue on exits 1A, 1B.
When somebody laughs, it says laughter. Of course, the AI machines pick up on this and they say positive. And you know, on our show, we love our humor and even black humor in the face of potentially bad economic events. You know, this is from a story we did a while ago about growing scams.
Reminder then to just check in on the people in your life who might be susceptible to these scams.
I feel like be included.
Keep left to continue on exit 1B.
Please check in on me.
Bit of deprecating humor from Kenny and Adrian, and that comes up as laughter, even though we're talking about it.
Continue on I-71 North for 3/4 of a mile.
Right. I mean, I feel like the next generation of sentiment analyzer bots will be able to distinguish ironic laughter and like mirthless chuckles from hearty chuckles. That's like the next evolution.
Yes, indeed. So AI people, think about not every laughter is created.
Well, this also makes me think about, like the fact that the transcript captures laughter, and that's something that is just inherent to audio and is not present in newspapers, right?
When I read, articles in the Wall Street Journal, I don't see little prompts for
In a quarter mile, use the second from the left lane to take the US 50 East exit toward I-471, US 52.
I feel like I laugh a lot. Just like off the charts giggling, contributing to our positive economic sentiment.
Use the second from the left lane to take the US 50 East exit.
No, like all the time. Like literally all the time. Yeah.
So I choose laughter.
Yes.
Continue for half a mile.
Face of economic uncertainty.
In a quarter mile, use the middle lane to continue on US 50.
So back to expressing here on what is. KKK edits the show, and the indicator is a production of NPR.
Use the middle lane to continue on US 50, then take the Martin Drive exit. Take the Martin Drive exit, then sharp left onto the ramp to Columbia Parkway. Sharp left onto the ramp to Columbia Parkway, then take the US 50 West exit. Take the US 50 West exit, then keep right. Keep right. In 800 feet, turn left onto Eggleston Avenue. At the light, turn left onto Eggleston Avenue, then your destination will be on the right. Your destination is on the right.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I am Thomas Dopasiola, whatever you want to call me. I'm back with my co-host, Marty O'Neill.
What's up, folks? Got this nice tea on.
Yeah. It's about 10 in the morning. I still got a little bit of highness from last night, but I'm good. What's up, guys? This is the Dope as Usual podcast. We're here to talk about a bunch of things. Right now, if you're here and you're watching, wherever you're watching, press that like button. We would appreciate that. If you're not following...
Ramadan begins this week, and so we asked some of our Muslim listeners to share what they are praying for this year.
Hello, my name is Iman Sada. My wish for this Ramadan is that we will achieve a ceasefire and there will be no more bombing and shelling on top of civilians in the Gaza Strip.
This is Meredith Spano. I think that the whole Ummah this year is going to be praying for Palestine.
In 100 feet, turn right onto Ohio River Scenic Byway, East Pete Rose Way. Turn right onto Ohio River Scenic Byway, East Pete Rose Way.
Especially during the holy month of Ramzan, when we are going to be praying day and night, our prayers will always include the people of Palestine.
Ramadan this year feels different, especially
in 1,000 feet, turn left onto East Marion Way, Ohio River Scenic Byway.
University of Chicago, whose research focuses on Muslim Americans.
Every moment of joy feels stolen and elicits a sense of guilt.
Guilt because of the mass death and suffering in Gaza. Tens of thousands of Palestinians have been...
At the light, turn left onto East Marion Way, Ohio River Scenic Byway.
To now fast, knowing that hundreds of thousands.
At the light, turn right onto Broadway, then turn left onto East 3rd Street.
And that it's an entirely avoidable situation. That is so painful to sit with.
That's a sentiment shared by Layla Al-Haddad. She's a Palestinian author based in the U.S.
My family members are all...
At the light, turn left onto East 3rd Street.
In Gaza City in the north, completely cut off from humanitarian aid trucks and from the rest of our family members who are in the south. And they are literally struggling to survive and feed themselves.
Al-Haddad has lost family members in the war between Israel and Hamas, and she says there's a feeling of helplessness as a ceasefire still seems unattainable.
السلام عليكم كيف حالكم يا جماعة كيف حالك ليلى
Family members in Gaza have sent her voice memos, like her cousin Heba, describing their desperate search for food. People are using animal feed to try to bake bread and foraging for wild greens.
Gaza is literally destroyed. There isn't any kind of food, no flour or rice, canned food, vegetables, fruit. We have forgotten these things a long time ago.
It does make, as a Muslim, make you reflect and think and focus kind of all your energies on prayer and patience.
Al-Haddad's 4 children are excited about Ramadan.
We have a calendar that we made.
In half a mile, keep right to continue on West 3rd Street.
Sort of good deed tasks, and so they've been asking about getting that out.
But it's difficult to balance feelings of joy and gratitude with anger and grief. Her cousins in Gaza are also trying to celebrate Ramadan in any way they can.
We have been through really difficult times and saw death with our own eyes, but God has destined us to stay alive.
They're all saying, please, Lord, help us see Ramadan, help us observe Ramadan, right? So they're anticipating it and they want to fast it. It's not something people want to avoid. Despite this all, they're asking for forgiveness and for ease for the hardship, and they're asking that they survive enough to be able to observe and see the month.
Consider this. What does Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza mean for the holiest of Muslim holidays? From NPR, I'm Ari Shapiro. It's Monday, March 11th.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Noom. Noom's first ever cookie.
Keep right to continue on West 3rd Street.
Habits for a healthier lifestyle. Check out the Noom Kitchen for 100 healthy and delicious recipes to promote better living. Available to
In 1,000 feet, turn right onto Central Avenue, Ohio River Scenic Byway.
Sponsor Sattva. Founder and CEO Ron Rudson is proud that each Sattva mattress is made to order.
Your mattress has a birth date after you order it. Nothing sits in muggy warehouses. Nothing sits in muggy basements of stores. When you order it...
At the light, turn right onto Central Avenue, Ohio River Scenic Byway. Then use the left 2 lanes to turn left onto the I-75 North ramp.
.com/NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor, the Capital One Venture X card. Earn unlimited 2x miles on everything you buy. Plus, get access to a $300 annual credit for bookings through Capital One Travel.
Use the left 2 lanes to turn left onto the I-75 North ramp.
It's Consider This from NPR. Ramadan starts this week, and for Muslims observing the holiday, this year's celebrations feel different.
Ramadan is a month in which we are to connect to God and to become overall more conscious about Him and about ourselves and about the people around us and about, the suffering of the world and the blessings that we take for granted.
That's Imam Omar Suleiman. He is the founder and president of Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research outside Dallas, Texas.
The happiness that you typically would feel at the holy month arriving, and the sadness at the death and destruction that we've seen over the last 5 months.
I asked him if the tradition of fasting during Ramadan takes on a different significance with widespread hunger and starvation in Gaza.
I think so. When COVID hit, we talked
In half a mile, keep left to continue toward I-75 North.
Social gatherings for granted. We used to take our communal worship for granted, and just the sustenance that comes through being in the presence of people for granted. But this year, we're seeing what it looks like to have everything that could possibly happen
Keep left.
to a person happen to a population, and the world completely unable to stop it. And so I think that for us, it has opened our eyes to the meaning of life, the meaning of solidarity, and the meaning of empathy. And I think it gives us an added layer to our worship this year. We always tell people to pray for others and to use what they are gaining in terms of the nourishment of the soul to physically, emotionally, spiritually nourish others. I think that for this year, our prayers, I hope, will be more sincere. I hope that our supplications will be deeper. But I hope that we actually see tangible difference on the ground in Gaza.
You are Palestinian American, and I know you talk about Gaza in your sermons, and I'm sure your congregation in the Dallas area includes Muslims of many different backgrounds. And so how do you integrate or balance your identity as Palestinian with your role as a religious leader to a broad, diverse community of Muslims?
So here's the thing, in my community, we have people that have lost 20, 30, 40 members of their family in Gaza. And they're coming to prayer every day, even outside of Ramadan. And so my entire congregation is immersed in this right now. I think that it's very important for people who perhaps don't go to a mosque regularly or don't interact with Palestinian Americans regularly to know that the entire Muslim community is absolutely immersed in what is happening in Gaza. And I think that there have been a lot of political miscalculations in reading the Muslim community. and media miscalculations and not understanding just how much this weighs on our conscience as a community. And so when I walk into a mosque or when I walk into any Muslim community these days, I feel like everyone around me is constituted, because everyone has seen that sadness either in their own families or people that have become like family to them over the years because they've worshipped side by side for so long, and now they are seeing that brother or that sister that they used to pray next to on a daily basis is coming to the prayer every day, and you can tell they've been weeping for the last few hours. That has been the case for the last few months. It's been a lot of sadness, it's been a lot of heartbreak, and there are Palestinians in pretty much every Muslim community in the United States. And every Palestinian has a story of loss right now, unfortunately, and I think that the entire community has felt that loss and embraced that loss, and is all thinking about how we can come together and not just make ourselves feel better with what is happening, but channel our community sadness into actually, bringing about global solidarity with the people of Gaza.
And so when a member of your congregation who has lost so many family members says to you, how do I practice the joy that I'm commanded to experience during Ramadan this year? What do you tell them?
I tell them that there are different meanings of joy. There is the joy of celebration, and then there's the joy of perspective and knowing that your family members have gone to a better place, and that there is ease after hardship, there is light after darkness. That Ramadan teaches us that after deprivation, there's fulfillment, and that your joy doesn't have to look like laughter and smiles, but that inner peace and contentment in knowing that the God that you worship has not forgotten your relatives, and your family that leaves from this world, even in the cruelest of fashion, will be embraced by the most compassionate, and that we will continue to strive together for those that are still alive to make sure that they're able to once again find joy in this world.
I've spoken to you about your role as a community leader, as a Palestinian American. What about just your own personal celebration of Ramadan with your family this year? How are you feeling about it?
Well, my wife and my children, my father, who is a Nakba survivor, was born in 1943 and has painful memories. And so I think that with my children, this has been a learning experience, an experience of growth for them, as it has been for us. Thankfully, every year in Ramadan, as a family, we have gone to homeless shelters. We've done things in our backyard with refugee populations that have left some of the war zones that were otherwise so distant, and exposed our families to our broader community, our broader Muslim family, our broader human family. But I think that for this year, look, I've shown my children that it's okay to cry, and that tears don't have to be tears of despair, that we always have hope, and that part of that hope is in our ability to continue to strive in whatever way God has allowed us to strive. Just like every Ramadan, we know that we can't solve world hunger with the small acts of kindness that we do. We can't solve the crisis overnight that has been visited upon our brothers and sisters in Palestine over all these years, but the small acts of solidarity will go a long way, especially when you have so many people around the world that have woken up to this reality for the very first time over these last 5 months.
Imam Omar Suleiman, thank you so much, and Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
This episode was produced by Brianna Scott and Lena Muhammad. It was edited by Patrick Jaron Watananan and Courtney Dornick. Our executive producer is Sammy Yenigan. It's Consider This from NPR. I'm Ari Shapiro.
At this year's Oscars, Oppenheimer took home the award for Best Picture. Emma Stone and Robert Downey Jr. also picked up wins, and Ryan Gosling brought the energy. For a recap of all the highlights, listen to the Pop Culture Happy Hour podcast from NPR.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Rosetta Stone. the perfect app to achieve your language learning goals no matter how busy your schedule gets. It's designed to maximize study time with immersive 10-minute lessons and audio practice for your commute. Plus, tailor your learning plan for specific objectives like travel. Get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off and unlimited access to 25 language courses. Learn more at rosettastone.com/NPR. This message comes from NPR sponsor Chevron, who is innovating to help responsibly meet rising energy demands, like at their Gulf of Mexico facilities, which are some of the world's lowest carbon intensity operations. Learn more at chevron.com/meeting demand.
Hi, this is Brendan, Maeve, Ellen, and Doug. We're here in Watertown, Massachusetts, about to try 9 different chilies for our 6th annual Chili Cook-Off.
This podcast was recorded at
12:35 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, March 11th of 2024.
Things may have changed by the time you hear it, but right now, it's chili time! They're in sync.
Good weather for a chili cook-off, especially in Massachusetts.
Hey there, it's the NPR Politics Podcast. I'm Asma Khalid, I cover the White House.
I'm Frank Ordonez, I cover the presidential campaign. And I'm Domenico Montanaro, senior political editor and correspondent.
And today on the show, we're going to talk about the merger of the Trump campaign and the RNC. On Friday, the Republican National Committee voted to install a series of new leaders handpicked by none other than the former president and 2024 presumptive GOP nominee, Donald Trump. Before we talk about what this all means, Franco, you were in Houston for that RNC meeting. I am so curious what it was like, because it was coming on the tail end of this week where Trump became the presumptive nominee in many ways. He had that huge win on Super Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't describe it as kind of like this rally type event. You know, it was a meeting, it was in a hotel ballroom, there were some speeches, but it had very huge significance. I mean, this is the next chapter. Trump has been getting ready for the general election, and he has been calling for months for the party to get behind him. And now that Haley's dropped out, this meeting was kind of the next step toward that. As you noted, he got his people elected to the top positions at the RNC, and that is extremely important.
When you say top people, who are you referring to?
We're talking about Michael Whatley. He's the head of the North Carolina GOP. He's now going to be the chairman of the RNC. He also comes with some controversy. Whatley argued against the results of the 2020 election that Biden won. We're also talking about Laura Trump. She's Trump's daughter-in-law. She's married to Eric Trump, his middle son. We're also talking about Chris LaCivita. Chris LaCivita is actually a senior advisor of the Trump campaign, and now he's going to be a chief operating officer.
Is he keeping dual roles?
He is keeping dual roles. So it's a lot of work, but it's clearly an effort by Trump to really get control of the RNC, which is something that he's wanted for a long time.
And Trump hasn't quite clinched the nomination yet. He's expected to do that tomorrow. And it's pretty usual for the nominee of the party to then start to coordinate fundraising with the party. Usually the person who is the nominee or becomes president winds up picking who the head of the organization will be. But there are some differences in how Trump has gone about this versus past candidates.
Domenico, you say it's not that unusual for the candidate to start coordinating with the party apparatus around fundraising, right, grassroots operations, etc. But how unusual is it for the presumptive nominee to hand-pick the people in power and put in a family member?
Well, a family member certainly is unusual. We haven't seen that happen. It is usual for a candidate to handpick who the top people will be, but they're usually party professionals. And I think there's going to be a little bit of tension when it comes to Laura Trump, who has never really run anything politically, and really Trump likes her communication ability. She's somebody who a lot of people see at rallies. She fires up the crowds and sort of warms them up before Trump comes out, and has been doing that for years. But she's had a couple of early flubs. I mean, saying that she thinks that it's okay for the RNC, for example, to be paying Trump's legal fees. It's not exactly something that has happened in the past, and usually the RNC is there to raise money, do a lot of the door knocking, keep a data program going so that people can identify who the voters are that are most likely to vote, and also support state parties down ballot.
Franco, what did the Republican committee members at this meeting in Houston think of Laura Trump?
I mean, I asked a lot of them about that. I mean, certainly there were some Republicans who have concerns about it for the reasons that Domenico just outlined. But most of them kind of shrugged their shoulders. I mean, some would say this is more of a ceremonial role, and Michael Watley is going to be the real head, and Chris LaCivita, again, the senior advisor, he is more of, the day-to-day operations, the operations person. And Laura is, more of the fundraising, and she's going to be on, as Domenico said, she's going to be on camera, she's going to be out there talking, and they say, it can actually be an advantage to have her there and have someone with Trump's last name, because they're going to try to reach out to voters who don't generally give to the RNC. They argue that at least maybe they'll have a little bit more trust in Laura Trump because of that. And also, the reality is so much of the RNC's ability to raise money is tied to Trump himself doing that. There's so many joint events. It's hard to separate the two anyways.
So, given what you're describing, that it's hard to separate the two, I don't know that any of this news seems particularly surprising to me in this current political moment. Unusual, maybe we could say, but not maybe very surprising. Were there any voices of dissent at this RNC meeting? Or did the folks in the room realize it's Trump's party, and are they on board with that?
I'd say most of them are on board. But there was some dissent leading up to this event, and some big dissent. There were actually some members. Henry Barber, he's a member from Mississippi. He introduced a couple of resolutions. One that would have maintained the committee's independence until a presumptive or a nominee was found. Now that's obviously null and void, but the other one was to prevent the RNC from paying Trump's legal fees. And that got a lot of attention, but it didn't get much traction from the members themselves. And they actually didn't even take it up in the committee meeting. Now there was one point where someone asked whether they could add new business, and it was immediately slammed down. I'm not saying that was for that resolution, but it definitely caught a lot of our attention. And I actually asked people about that resolution and what they thought about it. And again, people, for one, they said that the campaign had talked about not needing to do that, or that they wouldn't do that.
Not using RNC money for Trump's legal fees.
Correct. That's what was said by members of the campaign, and the members that I spoke to in Houston said they were going to take their word for it. But others I talked to, like Morton Blackwell, he's a member from Virginia, he said,
in 2 miles, take exit 16 for I-275 West toward Indianapolis.
Welfare going on here where the Democrats are trying to use the powers of the government to punish Republicans, and particularly Trump, and it's absolutely outrageous.
To be clear, the indictments against Trump were largely filed by an independent Justice Department, and the White House also has no involvement with those charges.
It's not particularly surprising that Barber's resolution was shot down because, he's from an old guard of the Republican National Committee. He's been around for quite some time. He's the nephew of former Mississippi Governor Haley Barber. So this is somebody who's sort of been more of a traditionalist. But what Trump has been able to do over the last 8 years has essentially taken over the Republican Party and inserted loyalists, to a degree that he never had in 2016, and I'd argue even 2020. He's in far stronger shape with the degree of pushback that he would face within the Republican National Committee, which is to say, almost none.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll be back in a moment.
This message comes from NPR sponsor, BetterHelp. If you had an extra hour in the day, how would you use it? BetterHelp Online Therapy can help you figure out what's most important to you, so you can prioritize it. Learn to make time for what makes you happy. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge.
In half a mile, take exit 16 for I-275 West toward Indianapolis.
First month. This message comes from NPR sponsor, One Life from Bleecker Street. Based on a true story that touched the world, Anthony Hopkins stars as Nicholas Winton, a man who helped rescue hundreds of predominantly...
Take exit 16, then keep left at the fork.
50 years later, as he is haunted by the fate of those he couldn't save, he is unexpectedly celebrated on national British TV by many of those he rescued. Helena Bonham Carter and Jonathan Pryce also star, only in theaters Friday.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Bluehost, introducing Wondersweet. Website creation, keep left at the fork.
Now with Bluehost, you
can answer a few questions and get a unique, customizable WordPress website or store right away. Go to bluehost.com.
Continue on I-275 West for 3 miles.
And we're back. And Franco, this leadership change comes at a moment when we're seeing Ronna McDaniel, who's part of another pretty prominent Republican family. She is the niece of Mitt Romney, though we can talk about this. She dropped that Romney part of her name. But this is coming, I was saying, at a moment when she is leaving that leadership position. Explain to us why that's the case, because I also thought Trump handpicked her as the chairwoman at one point.
Yeah, he did, and she actually mentioned that in her farewell speech. I mean, what happened, like a couple of the reasons why she's, leaving or has left the room, is primarily how poorly Republicans have done.
In 2 miles, take exit 41 for Ohio 4 toward Fairfield.
Special elections, they've just been getting beat and beat and beat. But there's been also other issues. There's been some accusations of exorbitant spending. There's a huge fundraising gap between the Republicans and the Democrats. So she's been coming under a lot of fire in the last few months, that it was just kind of time to go. And Trump wanted his people and people who were even more close to him in these roles.
Was there a catalyst? Because you mentioned the point that Republicans have been losing elections. They've been losing elections these past couple of years. It's not like this is a sudden change.
I do think kind of like the exorbitant spending and the questionable spending, including like private jets, kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back.
And let's remember, I mean, the problems that the Republican Party has had in the last few election cycles has really been because of Donald Trump, and not really an administrative arm of the party. So many candidates have run in Trump's image, and Trump has handpicked a lot of kind of extreme candidates who haven't been popular in places that are swing areas. And that's a thing that, Republicans are nervous could continue into 2024 when they feel like they should be able to take over Congress and the White House.
Domenico, do you have a sense of...
In half a mile, take exit 41 for Ohio 4 toward Fairfield.
Leaving compared to where it, traditionally is?
Yeah, I mean, they only have about $8 million cash on hand as of the end of 2023. That's pretty bad. I mean, it's the lowest the RNC has had since 2013, so more than a decade. And Franco noted all of this sort of exorbitant spending.
Take exit 41.
Whether it adds up to the real problem, it can be indicative of a larger problem, within a campaign. I mean, $250,000.
In a quarter mile, keep right at the fork. Follow signs for Ohio 4 Fairfield.
Really gained attention, and it was done, by the way, by people on the right who went and looked into Republicans' finances, and that's why some of this started. Ronna McDaniel is somebody who now we call Ronna McDaniel. She is...
Keep right at the fork.
Trump really kind of forced McDaniel to stop using the Romney part of her name, and even though she had been loyal and had been there over 7 years, these disclosures and kind of the party's losses over the last several years sort of forced her out.
And let's all remember, we're talking about Donald Trump here. I mean, you can be in favor one moment and be very much out of it.
Continue on Ohio 4 North for 2 miles.
She's no longer even attending these RNC meetings.
Oh, she was there. She gave a very emotional parting speech, but she's clearly not in favor because she's leaving.
And Trump has called her a friend, but just said that he wanted to make a leadership change, essentially. But this is the way it goes. I think we've seen that for the last several years. He requires fealty, and while she was giving that to him, there were still a lot of problems within the party structurally.
So before we go, Franco, I want to get a sense from you of what this leadership change means for the campaign apparatus itself, right? Like, you hear Democrats talk a lot about the need to kind of grassroots organize and the synchronization between the Biden campaign and the DNC, and they all kind of think as one. Now that we are seeing Trump handpicking his loyalists at the RNC, are we going to see something different in terms of how they are thinking, strategizing about the campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to definitely see better organization or more collaboration between the two, between the Trump campaign and also the RNC. I mean, clearly, when you're using the same donor roles, you're going to have, again, access to fundraising. Some staff are going to go back and forth. And the Trump campaign is going to be able to use RNC staff in key battleground states to kind of prop up their ground game over there. I mean, the Trump campaign is still a kind of a small operation. So they've been clamoring for these kind of needs, this kind of resources for a long time. And we've all remember when Trump was, pushing the RNC to cancel the Republican debates early. I mean, that's because he wanted all resources behind him to look towards the general election and look towards Joe Biden. Well, now he's going to have that. He's going to have that infrastructure. He's going to be in charge of that party infrastructure, and he now has his most loyal backers, including someone with his own last name, leading.
All right, well, that is a wrap for today's show. I'm Asma Khalid. I cover the White House.
I'm Frank Ordonez. I cover the presidential campaign.
And I'm Domenico Montanaro, senior political editor and correspondent.
And thank you all, as always, for listening to the NPR Politics Podcast.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Shopify. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sell without needing to code or design. Just bring your best ideas and Shopify will help you open up shop. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/NPR.
There's a new way to support this show and public media. Please consider signing up for the NPR Plus podcast bundle. NPR Plus listeners get to unlock sponsor-free shows and bonus episodes. You can find out more at plus.npr.
In a quarter mile, turn right onto Ohio 4 Bypass North.
In the last few years, U.S. government officials have grown increasingly concerned about Chinese espionage over things like TikTok.
The proposed legislation comes amid growing concerns over the threat the Chinese-owned social media platform poses U.S. national security issues.
And telecom company Huawei.
The U.S. has banned most American companies' transactions with Huawei over fears that it will help Beijing spy on other nations.
There was even the Chinese spy balloon from last year.
Intelligence officials have called the Chinese craft a surveillance balloon, while those in the Chinese government claim it was a weather monitoring vessel.
But there's something else worrying U.S. officials. Cranes. More specifically, the kind of cranes you see around ports.
These cranes are these giant structures that sit at every port and, loom hundreds of feet in the air.
That's our colleague, Aruna Vishwanatha.
Over the course of a couple of decades, it turned out that a Chinese state-controlled company ends up making pretty much all of these cranes. And it got to a point where the national security officials started thinking about, what vulnerabilities that potentially posed.
And some national security officials have likened this to a sort of Trojan horse.
Yeah, so as you remember, from Greek mythology, a Trojan horse is something that comes in seeming innocuous, but hidden inside it are real dangers. And so with these cranes, you have structures that seem just part of the port infrastructure, but lurking within it is the potential for it to be used as an intelligence collection tool and also a potential tool to throttle port operations.
China says these concerns are driven by paranoia and that the U.S. is trying to obstruct trade between the two countries. Welcome to The Journal, our show about money, business, and power. I'm Kate Linebaugh. It's Monday, March 11th. Coming up on the show, why U.S. officials are worried about Chinese-made cranes.
This episode is brought to you by Cigna Healthcare.
We share our work days with the same people, but there are often unseen struggles that aren't shared, like stress and burnout, caregiving for a loved one, or feeling misunderstood at work. But insight, awareness, and empathy will help us better see the issues our coworkers are dealing with, and that can make us and our companies healthier too. Join Holly Robinson Pete and her guests on The Visibility Gap, a new podcast presented by Cigna Healthcare.
According to Wikipedia, a crane is a machine used to move materials both vertically and horizontally.
That's true.
Utilizing a system of a boom, hoist, wire, ropes, or chains, and sheaths for lifting and relocating heavy objects with the swing of a boom.
That's all true.
There you go.
Yeah.
But the cranes we're talking about today are the ones in the ports.
Not just the ones in the ports, but the biggest ones in the ports. They are really crucial to the operations of these ports and to the U.S. supply chain. Without these cranes, you can't get anything really off of a ship and like load it onto a truck and off to, the markets for American consumers, and vice versa. You can't take American goods and put them onto a ship to send them out. So they are really very crucial aspects of the U.S. supply chain.
Right. Everything and anything that is imported. Soybeans going out, dishwashers coming in.
Right.
For years, China's been dominating the production of these cranes. About 80% of cranes used in American ports are made in China by a company called ZPMC.
So ZPMC is a subsidiary of China Communications Construction Company, which is a really crucial company within China and has been part of their broader Belt and Road Initiative to build out infrastructure in key areas of significance to the Chinese government across the world.
And is it a private company or is it a Chinese state-owned company?
It's owned by the Chinese state, and in China, companies operate to a degree at the mercy of the Chinese government and are obligated to do what the Chinese government asks them to do.
Who was ZPMC's competitors as it was coming up?
So there's a couple of European providers of these cranes, and they sort of dominated the market at that point. When ZPMC came onto the market, the quality might not have been quite at that same level, but what they were offering was a pretty good product at like a much cheaper price. And so, just as a comparison, I was talking to a port operator in Georgia who they decided they wanted to stick with a Western provider rather than go with ZPMC. And whereas ZPMC, you could get the equipment for, between 13 to 15 million a crane, with the European provider, it was something more in the ballpark of 20 million. So you're talking about real money for any port operator, and that was their calling card, and that was how they pushed into the U.S. market so successfully.
As ZPMC grew, its offerings became more advanced and high-tech. It even struck up a partnership with Microsoft. In a 2018 video posted by Microsoft, the former ZPMC chairman plugged the company's software that allowed for remote monitoring of the cranes, even from mobile phones. ZPMC officials were often celebrated around the U.S., like in Charleston, South Carolina, where a top ZPMC official presented a model of a crane to a middle school. One thing I'm wondering about is how do they get these giant cranes to U.S. ports?
That's another interesting aspect of the story. So these cranes are built and fully assembled within China. Then they get welded onto a ship, and basically a ship sets out carrying potentially, 2 or 3 of these cranes, sails, around the tip of Africa, through the Atlantic Ocean, and ends up on the east coast of the United States. And with these, 200, 300 foot high structures already built on these ships coming in.
So the port operators don't really have a great sense of what's in them or on them.
They do run their own tests and run their own scans, but these structures come in fully assembled already, and so they're not being brought in parts and then assembled. And so in that sense, you know, they don't have like 100% visibility into what all has gone into it.
Sort of like a Trojan horse.
Could be, yes.
And recently, Pentagon officials have been growing concerned that these cranes are hiding equipment and software that could allow China to spy on U.S. ports and military operations.
So at a lot of ports, you have naval bases nearby, and the Pentagon uses commercial ports often to ship out military supplies and get stuff in. They don't have their own ports. And so the fact that, you know, you have Chinese-made cranes transporting, potentially moving military equipment, and being able to register what was going out, where it was going, what was coming in, that sort of surveillance, that immediate surveillance concern was a big one.
These concerns go beyond spying and surveillance.
Even early on in the Trump administration, they had game doubt if the U.S. got into a hot conflict with China, how might China respond and what tools would they have at their disposal? And they came to the conclusion that because these ZPMC cranes were so prevalent at so many U.S. ports and could be accessed remotely, that China could potentially shut down all U.S. port activity with, you know, barely lifting a finger and like not even having to use its Navy.
But that's sort of like an extreme scenario, right?
Yes, yeah. The more near-term concern is the surveillance aspect of it. And then the more extreme scenario is the ability to potentially get in and remote control them.
ZPMC says that it abides by all laws and regulations, and that it manufactures its cranes in accordance with international standards. But these security concerns have been gaining momentum. That's next.
This episode is brought to you by ServiceNow. Everyone's talking about AI. Everyone. But where do you start? How can it actually help your business? The ServiceNow platform brings intelligence into every corner of your company. So every person, every system, every process, everything works better. Put AI to work. Tap the banner or go to servicenow.com/GenAI to see how.
Today, Healthier is happening at CVS Health in more ways than you've ever seen. It's wellness destinations for seniors, including select locations of Oak Street Health and CVS Pharmacy. Doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and everyone in between offering quality care and support virtually, in person, even on the phone. If in-home evaluations through Signify Health, and mental health needs directly. And those are just a few of the ways Healthier is happening. To see more, visit cvshealth.com/healthier happens together. CVS Pharmacy, Oak Street Health, CVS Specialty, Signify Health, and Clinical Care to CVS Health. Eligibility and services are in
An agent said they found equipment on board that could be used for intelligence gathering. A port executive said the port hadn't found any issues while testing the cranes. But Aruna says this raised some big questions.
If you think about the way kind of signals, like intelligence collection works, if you had any kind of collection device at the top of these cranes, you can basically collect every signal in a 25-mile radius. And so with these cranes, you potentially had the ability to put a very small device at the top of these cranes and you could collect information about anything happening on the base.
In the years since, U.S. lawmakers have called for security reviews of U.S. ports and hearings over Chinese cranes. And then last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that an ongoing congressional investigation found more than a dozen modems inside ZPMC cranes at U.S. ports.
Some of these modems have active connections to the operational components of the crane and could transmit information, externally, and this is according to lawmakers who are investigating this. They have said that the ports themselves had not asked for these modems, and so that raises a lot of questions about, why they were put there.
How unusual is it for there to be modems or kind of communication devices inside these cranes?
I mean, these things are designed for remote access by design, but it can just as easily, you can view that through an innocuous lens of, you need to be able to access these things remotely to be able to troubleshoot them and work on the maintenance and things like that. And then through a nefarious lens, it becomes an avenue for control.
ZPMC says that reports about its cranes in U.S. ports as potential tools for spying were misleading and made without sufficient factual review.
The Chinese government and the embassy in Washington has dismissed these concerns as paranoia-driven and, designed to just hurt China's rise, and was sort of using fake national security concerns as a way to, crush a Chinese company.
The Biden administration is concerned enough that last month it announced a plan to improve cybersecurity at U.S. ports and to start replacing Chinese cranes.
They are pumping $20 billion into both improving port security and specifically trying to stand up domestic production of these cargo cranes.
How are they just conjuring up U.S. production of something that hasn't been built here for decades?
That is a good question. So what they have said so far is that a U.S. subsidiary of a Japanese company is planning to onshore some manufacturing capacity where they're going to start trying to make these cranes. And so some of the mechanics of how exactly this is going to work is still not totally clear, but there is a company that is planning to do this, and it has taken steps to start doing this, and this is the effort that the administration is getting behind.
And how did the national security officials you spoke with respond to this notion that their concerns are just paranoia?
They point to everything that these major Chinese state-owned companies are doing in the United States as an extension of what the Chinese government is doing. The sectors it wants to dominate, the ways in which it is leaning on its companies to promote its military capabilities and its foreign policy agenda. Like every step the Chinese government has been taking is moving in this direction over the course of 20 years is how they're looking at this. And they point to this broader picture and this pre-positioning in the event that they want to attack U.S. critical infrastructure as all pieces of a puzzle that show you in plain sight what they believe the Chinese government is gearing up to do.
That feels like what they're talking about is a 20-plus year master plan to embed Chinese technology around the United States for a potential conflict, like that's quite a long-term